Good evening, and welcome to this, the Livermore City Council meeting of January 11th. I now call the meeting to order. Let the roll call show that all of the members of the council are present and accounted for. I ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We have no proclamations and presentations tonight. Moving on to the Citizens Forum, this affords the public an opportunity to speak to the council for 3 minutes on any subject that is not on the agenda. I actually don't have any speaker cards. Oh, well, hang on a sec. We're going to get them. So again, the City Council can neither deliberate nor take action on any item that is brought up during the Citizens Forum, but it could be brought up for being on the agenda at a later time. Aha! And there they are. Thank you. Okay, we have Connie Copps, Catherine Barker, and John Stein.
Connie Copps, 1422 Tulip Way. I'm here today because I had concerns at the December 14th meeting on, let's see here, the responsibilities on the parking lot between the Springtown Association and the City of Livermore. And I was told after the meeting that I could talk to Susan Neer about what the, getting a copy of the lease in the parking lot. The city attorney told me that. I haven't really had time, or when I called or came down, she wasn't there that day. So I'm wondering if you could email a copy of the lease between the City of Livermore and Springtown. And I think that's it. I'm mainly concerned about, in the interim phase of the changes that are going on, that that parking lot is covered by insurance, and I will be speaking to my homeowners association at the meeting on the 21st just to make sure that there's no gray area that we're not meeting up with. And thank you for the checking up on that. I left my email address on the card. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Copps. Catherine Barker, John Stein, Don Meeker.
Good evening. My name's Catherine Barker, and I'm here to ask you to consider making the pedestrian signals downtown automatically change to walk so that we don't have to hit the button. There's a few reasons I'd like you to consider taking action on this. The first is that it would improve pedestrian traffic flow downtown. A lot of times, especially when it's very hot in the summer, pedestrians will just wait for the light to cycle because they don't get there 4 seconds earlier to hit the button. I also think it will increase the safety because it will reduce the number of pedestrians crossing at green lights when they've missed hitting the signal, so they won't be jaywalking or crossing without that walk sign. I think it will also signal to the car traffic on Livermore and First Streets in particular that pedestrians are present, because if the signal's always changing, it's reminding them to look for people in the downtown area. And I think it will encourage pedestrians I think it will encourage more pedestrian traffic by promoting their safety and increasing their convenience. I have reviewed the general plan and the circulation element, and 7.1 says that our goal is to design and maintain a safe and interconnected pedestrian-oriented downtown circulation system. I think this would be a great help to that, and I ask that you consider it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we got your email address here so we can have our city engineer respond. Thank you. John Stein, Don Meeker.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court. Happy 2016. Last meeting, I brought up the airport protection area around the Livermore Airport. 20 years ago, the city looked at accidents that had happened around Reed Hillview, Hayward Airport, and Buchanan, as well as noise impacts and development patterns. We worked with the city of Pleasanton, the city of Dublin, Alameda County, and the local landowners to set up an airport protection area. The city is now looking at putting 4,000 new units under essentially the flight pattern of the Livermore Airport. The airport protection area was designed for two things. The first was to protect the well-being and quality of life of Livermore residents, both present and future, and also to protect the airport from noise complaints. They seem to have gone away recently. The Pleasanton Planning Commission recently expressed its support for the airport protection area. And I would urge that before you make any substantial changes in the airport protection area, you take the time to visit the local airports, Reed Hillview, Hayward, and Buchanan, and see what the impacts are of building housing too close to the airport. You can also talk to the various city councils, Concord, Hayward, and the city of San Jose, and the problems they've had. At the November meeting, there was talk of extending the south runway to spread the noise impacts over the airport by diverting more of the flights on the south runway, 25L. I would urge in the support of transparency, before you proceed too far, you get the input from the local residents of Livermore and Pleasanton about how they support or don't support that. About 6 years ago, the city council, when they had a full council meeting with people complaining about noise, made a promise essentially not to extend the runways. And so I think that before you change that position, you talk to the people and find out how they feel. Also, the proposed current plan essentially makes a lot of the existing businesses in Livermore non-conforming uses. The Cotteroli or Livermore Ford, the interstate storage, Bridge Lux, the Zone 7 courtyard and meeting rooms would all be non-compatible under one or more of the proposals. So I think it's time to look at the risks and costs and benefits of massive housing around the BART station and whether it's a benefit to the residents of Livermore. I've been a strong supporter of the BART station, but I think the proposed development around it is not compatible with the quality of life for the residents of Livermore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Pardon me. Don Meeker.
Don Meeker, 2589 College Avenue. Happy New Year. I thought I would start the new year off by going back 100 years. We're going to go back to 1916 and kind of look at the things that the city council did at that time, the infrastructure, what kind of systems you supported, and who's on the payroll and whatnot. So I'll start with the first meeting, January 3rd, 1916. Regular meeting. No quorum present. So we'll try again tomorrow. January 4th, 1916. This became a regular meeting. The monthly reports of the clerk, marshal, treasurer, and recorder were received. Bills paid. There was a state compensation insurance fund for municipal employees. Fire department salary for the quarter ending December 1915 was $150. CP LeVever was paid both as the marshal and the superintendent of streets. You had a utility man, you had 2 night watchmen, You paid $65 to the Women's Improvement Club to pay the gardener for the library park, Carnegie Park, because he was not at that time on the payroll. Paid someone to clean the streets. You had a clerk, town attorney, recorder. You had 3 different bills to PG&E. One for electric lights, one for the fire hydrants, and a bill to sprinkle the streets. You paid the commercial coal company for coal, so you're burning coal. You paid for some barley, so that meant that you had some horses. And you paid a livery hire to the Fashion Livery Stable. Requests repairs to L Street were done by Dr. John W. Robertson of the Livermore Sanitarium, requesting that L Street be repaired to the town limits, which at this time was just on the other side of College. Let's see, we had, you had to notify the property owners between, let's see, the west side of J&K between 5th and 6th. You notified the property owners to repair their sidewalks because there were complaints. Granted a license to somebody to do business as a as a bar, the corner of Chestnut and Livermore Avenue. And then finally, you told the Finance Committee to get an auditor to check the books for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Meeker. Okay, that's all the cards that I have for the Citizens Forum. Moving on to the consent calendar. These are items that are typically passed on a single motion of routine nature. I have one speaker card for 4.01, County Cops.
Hi, Connie Cops, 1422 Tulip. Again, I was looking at the minutes of the December 7th and the December, I think it was 14th meeting, and I think they should be pulled, and this is my reasoning behind it. I think that when there were anecdotal records written on what was said, I think that they were too vague, and I think that if there was there's some aspects, some things that maybe should have addressed a little bit specifically, not a lot in depth or anything like that, but I think that when you're looking back at your meetings, if you say someone was for or someone was against, when they might have brought up a key factor that should be reportable, I think they should really report that, and so if you would take a look at those and decide if you think that they're thorough enough, because maybe there could be additional training on how to extract substance without, spilling your guts. I know that cities get sued all the time because, you're not careful about what you said or anything like that. But I think that if you're going to think proactively about the future and issues, someone should be able to look back when something specific with substance was brought up. So please review those. I'm asking you to pull those to look for them and possibly incorporate some training into writing the records and for record retention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. As I recall, when we was talking about minutes, originally minutes were strictly to record the action items. Is that correct, Ms.?
Yes,
City
Mayor. This is really receptive. The minutes are to capture the official actions of the council. Minutes are not a verbatim transcription, not even a detailed summary. Being a city clerk, we constantly go to trainings, we go to seminars. The common practice of doing minutes now is to link your minute skeleton, basically what we have now, to the actual video recording of the meeting. That way you get actual transcription, you know exactly what the person has said. That is the modern day practice.
So if somebody wanted to go back through the record, they could literally link the minutes
Yes.
to the video online,
Yes.
either through their computer, their web, or their local mobile device through TV30.
It's the most accurate way of doing it.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Modern era. Okay, that's all the speaker cards I have for the consent calendar. Or does anybody wish to pull any item for discussion? Do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
I'll move approval.
Moved by Councilmember Turner.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Warner. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to, let's see, 5.01 is being continued, which gets, wow, gets us to 6.01. I don't believe we have any appointments coming up. Asset Management Program Update, 6.02. We almost got to this last time, but we'll take another whack at it.
Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Anthony Smith. I'm a management analyst in the Public Works Department. Joining me this evening are Jeff Schaefer, our maintenance and golf operations manager, as well as Colin Chung of Cayuga Solution. The city currently owns and maintains over $1 billion in estimated value assets, such as roads, traffic signals, parks, landscaped areas, and public buildings. On September 28th last year, the council approved an agreement with Cayuga Solution to develop an asset management program. This program will be developed over the next 2 years and provide an inventory and analysis regarding the city's general fund funded assets. During this process, staff will return to the council at key points to both update the council and to ask for input on the process and the asset management strategies. The next upcoming check-ins will include a review of the existing capital improvement program, the pavement program, and the formation of an infrastructure committee comprised of Livermore residents. Tonight, staff's invited our consultant to give an overview of the process and illustrate some of the key components of our asset management program. So with that, I'd like to go and introduce Colin Chung from Cayuga Solution.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm absolutely delighted. Last year, we left off, and it's almost kind of funny we say last year because it's only been a couple of weeks, but nonetheless, we proceeded to move it to the next meeting because the member and the mayor thought this was a very important topic, and which puts a little more pressure on me on giving that topic back to you. But I believe we have a great program, and I'm very excited to work through development of this asset management program with your staff. And I'm absolutely delighted to get to know more about your city and fantastic food and beautiful areas that I get to see every almost inch of your city as we explore into this program. So without further ado, I wanted to run through a visualization of what it is that we're doing, how we're going to walk through each of the key process to drive a data-backed justification and calculation and projection of what our needs are in the future, and then how we're going to utilize different concepts to start prioritizing to ensure that we're getting the maximum value for every investment the city is making into the infrastructure. So before we could build a program, we needed to define what this asset management means for the city of Livermore. And we come up with a definition of delivering an established level of service while managing assets to minimize life cycle costs with an acceptable levels of risk. There's going to be a lot of concepts that's built into this definition that we will address as throughout the presentation. So if you could kind of hold some of the thoughts on the key words here, hopefully we'll be able to clarify that as we go. But with the asset management, what we're really trying to do is move away from a reactive state to a more proactive state. Instead of trying to establish budget based on how much we spent last year, we want to think about what we really need to spend this particular year and proactively identify what are the assets that are failing and then react to that before actual failure occurs. But through also risk, we want to ensure that we are making the right decision at the right time for the right reason at the right cost, and ensuring that we are making the best investment decision. Okay? So how are we going to do this? Oops, we missed the goal. So the goal of this program is to find this balance for the city. We have the level of service that we're going to be providing with every one of your assets to the citizens. But there's a cost to provide that service. We need to start understanding what that cost is going to be. Whatever that we can't fund, there's a risk component to it. But then we also need to communicate with our citizens and let them understand perhaps there's some expectations that they need to comprehend and then for us to deal with together. So how are we going to do this asset management program? Well, we're going to try to find out what is it going to take to catch up. What are the deferred maintenance? What are the deferred work in the infrastructure that we have yet to do or to provide in order to meet the level of service that the city's committed? After that, what's it going to take to keep up the regular ongoing maintenance, regular ongoing rehabilitation, regular ongoing replacement of assets that we're going to need? And moving forward, what do we need to do? How do we get the best bang for the buck? How do we get the funding that are necessary to maintain the level of service? And how do we manage that risk that we're going to do? The key processes of doing this is going to be, we're going to go and document almost every asset that the city owns and manage. And this includes every bench, every picnic table, every street light, traffic light, signage, and we're going to end up with huge amount of data-backed information. For each of the assets that we're going to inventory and collect, we're also assessing the condition. So we're going to try to answer, what's the current state of my asset? We're going to help identify what is the level of service for each of what kind of shape should we want the benches to look like, the picnic tables, the playground, and other assets that we're going to deliver to the citizens. We're going to start assessing everything by risk, and then we're going to go more into this about the concept of risk, but we're going to start evaluating everything from risk and then try to prioritize everything by risk. And with that, understand the budget, resources required to catch up, keep up, and move forward. We're going to try to come up with some understanding on what's the cost to provide the service. If you want the Livermore Avenue to look at a certain condition level, what's it going to take in a yearly basis for us to maintain at that level? We're going to provide everything from a data-backed justification. And we're going to tell the infrastructure story to the city. But one of the key elements that we're going to do it differently is we're going to tell it with the community involvement. And I have to say that there are very, very few cities in the United States at the moment that are approaching asset management from a citywide perspective. So I commend your leadership and your thoughtful process in really bringing the whole city perspective into this whole program. So what does this program contain? Roadway assets, your pavement, sidewalks, median, curbs and gutters, street lights, signage, traffic signals, and so on. Bridge assets, the pedestrian bridges, the vehicle bridges. Buildings, all the buildings, including this building that you own and manage. And for each of the building, we're going to go in. What is the HVAC system, the carpet, the wall? What do we need to do with it? And then we're going to assess all that. Parks, landscape assets, plaza, fountain, monuments, trails, benches, storm drain assets, pipes, pump stations, your storm structures, walls. You do have a lot of walls in the city, and public art pieces, beautiful artwork all across the city that we are always wanting to know. In order to manage it, we have to know what it is and document it so that we could start managing from a data perspective. So you could start, for every time we go out there, we're going to take pictures of it. We're going to record the description of the asset. We're going to take GPS coordinates of the asset to know exactly what it is, the sizes, the material, the type. And we're going to take photo. And some of the assets, you're even going to have videos of each of the facilities, what it's going to look like. All the parks will have this video recordings of it. Your walls, your trails, the storm channels. How are we going to do this? We're going to utilize the best technology available. So as you drive around in the city, you might see one of our partner vehicles with the sort of the Google imagery light thing on top of it. They're going to drive every feet of your road, and then while doing that, taking a 360 video of all the infrastructure. And using technology and GPS technology along with that, we're going to spot out what is the exact coordinates of each of your assets and then record that in your GIS system, Geographic Information System. Even your sidewalk, we're going to walk it and look for offsets and the defects in the sidewalks. So this is not your park, but here's an example of a park when it's finished where all these dots represent an asset, whether it's a fountain, whether it's a bench, it could be a barbecue, it could be a picnic table, and then you could click on it, know exactly where it is, but also have a picture attribute associated with it, and all the other information such as when it was installed, when was last rehabbed, how much it is, and all thousands and thousands of information. As I told you before, as we're going out and inventorying all these assets, we're going to look for the needs in terms of the building needs, in terms of the roadway needs, and we're going to capture and identify and record what we need to do, where we need to do it, and what's it going to take to fix that particular problem. We're going to communicate that back to you from a visualization, creating different maps of the state of the asset at a very executive level, all the way down to the very detailed level for each of the assets. And here's an example how some of the assets could be color-coded to help you understand where your problematic areas are and where your good areas are. In addition, we're looking for any other liability issues, particularly in your ramps. Does it meet ADA requirements, the slope, the lip, the truncated dome? In the facility, in the restroom, does it meet the ADA requirements? Any other places that require ADA specification, we're going to look for that, identify deficiencies, and also start estimating what will it take to mitigate that deficiency. Like I said, for all the miles of sidewalk, we plan to walk it, and maybe I'll be much thinner at the end of the project. However, what we want to do is start identifying any potential liabilities for the city. So any sidewalk offsets greater than ½ inch, we're going to record it, GPS the location, and the city staff will know exactly where the problems are. Here's an example of a map. Not your city, but you'll get a map, something similar for every location, and then how much of an offset and what it will take to mitigate that. So like I said, there's going to be thousands and thousands of assets that are going to be collected. So we're going to need to document that and record that. So we'll develop in an asset database. It's called an asset register that documents every asset, what the attribute is, when it was put in, how much it is to replace that asset in 2016, and also what's the size, what's the material, how long do we expect that asset to last during the life of the asset, what do we need to do to that asset in order to keep it going at the level of service that we're wanting to provide with that asset. We're going to organize the asset with what's called an asset hierarchy, which all these information in terms of the need can be rolled up at the asset level, at the city level, even at the asset level. Now, if I was to do this for one asset or a couple assets, it's pretty easy to do it in a back of a paper or using Excel, but because of the sheer quantity of data that we're dealing with, what we are bringing to the city is an asset management tool called IRIS, Infrastructure Reinvestment Intelligence System. Utilizing this asset information, we're going to be able to understand what's the total number of assets. Of all the assets, what's the total valuation going to be? And not only that, for every asset, this tool is going to calculate the life cycle cost of ownership for that particular asset. How long does that asset live after that end of the useful life? How much money do we need to invest in order to replace that asset? When is that estimated to be? And during the life of the asset, it's going to project what the anticipated condition of that asset is going to be, and also the risk profile associated with that. So using this information, what we're intending to do is, with all the data that we have, generate year by year deferred maintenance, CIP, project or replacement rehabilitation need. And we're going to come up with an estimated budget it will take in order to address all the problems that we found from a year-by-year perspective. Now, what this tool will also allow us to do is, if you click on any particular year, exactly identify what are the assets that are being called out for that particular year. What, why, where, how much, what's the problem, what's the criticality, what's the value of that asset, and help us really understand, is this really something that we need to do? Can this be deferred? Or, perhaps we could reschedule it for another time, and allow us to proactively predict failure before it actually is failed. Now, one of the key components of asset management is a concept of risk, which we're incorporating into the program. The concept of risk is divided up into two key components. One is probability of failure. How likely is this asset going to fail, or the timing to failure of that particular asset? That gives us an indication of how much time do we have before we need to do something about it. But more importantly, what is the consequence of failure? When that asset fails, what kind of impact does it have from an environment perspective, from a social perspective, and from an economic perspective? And we're going to rate this asset by asset and categorize it. So under a limited situation, what we are trying to do is address the high-risk assets, the assets that fall under the red zone. Those are our immediate needs that we need to get to because there's a high consequence of failure that's associated with that. It's going to cause a lot of social impact. It may cause a lot of environmental impact, or it may cost the city a lot of money to mitigate that. So the tool then will allow us to predict what our future failures are going to be, and then categorize that based on this risk matrix. Now with this, then we're going to see, okay, what is our worst nightmare and how much it is going to take for us to mitigate that. And again, we'll be able to drive asset by asset under each of those cells under the matrix and exactly understand what kind of budget is going to need and what kind of resource and what kind of work level is needed to do that. Now, when you put all this information together, what the tool is going to allow us to project is what is that sort of the annual budget that's going to be required to sustain the delivery of the assets for the planning horizon. Now, this is good. However, there's always a bit of a sticker shock. Hopefully we won't get a whole lot of sticker shock in that this is our current budget. This is what the projected needs are. Then this becomes the unfunded portion of the work that we're going to need to deal with. This is your risk. Then from there, we could start the analysis of if we were to increase our funding level, if we stay at current level, what kind of impact does it have on a yearly basis from a work backlog perspective or from an overall risk profile perspective? Or if you were to change that, even 5%, what kind of increase would that have and what kind of impact will that have moving forward? And what we'll be able to do is start understanding what is an appropriate level of funding that we were going to need in order to address the most high-risk assets. Obviously, we're going to have to assume some level of risk associated with that. And tell you that kind of information for you to assist in your decision-making. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is to understand what's it going to take to catch up, move forward, and also, keep up, and also moving forward, how we're going to manage this asset. What we are leaving with you is a platform for continuous improvement. We're going to leave you the methodology, the process, the data-backed foundation, and also the tools that are necessary for staff to keep building this story of infrastructure that allows you to start refining through this asset management process so that we're proactively planning for the future and managing failure before any failure might occur. So this is a very high-level executive summary of the program that we are trying to develop and an anticipation of some of the work product that's going to come and be presented to you during the program's duration.
So at this stage of the program, staff is looking for the council to approve the general direction. Obviously, we're still pretty early in the program, but staff and the consultant are available for questions.
Very good. Thank you. Questions? Councilmember Warner.
Yeah, well, a couple of observations and questions. I should say, I'll preface it with the fact that this is my professional area, what I'm working currently in. So I understand this in pretty good detail. And I wanted to say, based on that, I'm real impressed with what you're proposing here. So I think this is what we were talking about doing last year when we said we needed to solve this, and that we've got several pillars of our economic stability here, and we've handled OPEB pretty well, and we've gotten our reserves back in order. I think we're doing pretty well, and this is the last piece that I think that we need to fix. And I'm glad you noted that not very many cities or counties are dealing with this, but this is the way that you would professionally have to deal with that. So I think we're absolutely on the right track, and I'm very impressed. I have just one sort of thought here at the moment, and I'm familiar with doing this in the way you've done it on the slide on the risk, and I don't know if you could bring that back. Sure, be helpful. But there's something that I kind of want to say in a classic way, and you've got that just right there: timing to failure. But I'm struck by in a case like this, and some of the concepts that are in the book Tipping Point, where things don't really fail; they just look bad. And when they start looking bad, then there's this downward spiral.
That's right.
So there's some thinking to be done on what is meant by that, but it's not just failure, right? It's the point at which you start to spiral downward is another thought. So I think this is where the community input's going to be real important.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing, in the way you showed that, what's our budget need and everything else, from what I understand so far, that the problem really ultimately is not solvable within our own means. And in particular, that's because of the roads. So part of what we're going to have to do when we think about consequence of failure and all of that kind of stuff, and what does that really mean, but I think we're going to have to separate out the assets and say, only through state help, county help, federal, are we going to solve the roads. But we do have the power to solve the other problems. So I think I absolutely like this framework. I think we're going to need to refine it a little bit, and it's in the conversations with the community that we'll really get there. But I'll just anticipate that, for instance, if we said that the highest risk and consequences, say, in the roads, and we got to put all our money there, we may have nothing left over for anything else as a problem. So however we do this framework, another alternative here is to say, we'll keep everything else to where it needs to be, and then what's left over will go to roads. So I'm just anticipating that this is the kind of conversation that we will eventually get into with the community, and I think the tool and the approach that you're putting together are just fantastic. So, thank you.
Councilmember Gary, or Vice Mayor Gary?
Either works. Hey, you.
Vice Mayor.
Again, compliments to staff and the consultant. This is exactly what we've been looking for, and also somewhat professionally, also doing risk assessment in my line of the universe. I'm glad you had that slide up, and I'm not saying to get into the discussion tonight, and maybe you already do this in your deeper return of work product to communities. But in terms of mortality, I think that cuts, two ways in terms of timing to failure, and I'd like your professional input as you synthesize the risks back. And I'm going to say the public health, not public safety, because the common perception is public safety is police and fire. Modern society dies, literally, without water, the power to pump it, and the sanitation. So as you come back and say time to failure for a park bench has a different public health criticality than time to failure for a water, a transmission main, a sewer interceptor, and how we balance those economically, I'd love to have some weighted input on. The second thing, if you go forward to your budget scenario question and just feedback to staff and Mr. Alicio in particular, keep going, the one with the scenarios on it. The kind of large cost replacement headaches we have and maintenance of large cost headaches, I don't think yield themselves to a common linear use of funds model. In other words, let's take a fire truck as an example, my old business. You save for 15 years, you have cash in the bank, you buy a new one. And incrementally, you're saving 1/15 of every fire truck every single budget year, and that's really easy to put in a budget. But with the cost of some of these assets, the only way to ultimately do total replacement will be bond debt and or federal state grants. So I'd like the scenarios to come back and establish with us some new council policies built along the lines of how we tiered our reserves, such as you always have at the enterprise funds and the general funds enough emergency reserves to go repair something that catastrophically breaks. You then budget, and you're going to help us figure this out, some layer of cash to do programmatic repair and programmatic replacement. But then I think here's, Doug, what we need to have is another economic strategy that says we're not going to raise the city's debt borrowing to the ceiling and then not be able to afford an infrastructure replacement bond for 5 miles of sewer interceptor work. So I'd like to see part of the model acknowledge that part of use of funds, aka cash flow, is debt load.
Right.
And how much debt load should we be planning every year or in 10-year leaps, along with cash flow to fix the small pipes, the leaky pump station. And because we have to provide every year for all the public's goods and needs. And if we put $1 billion away in the piggy bank, we wouldn't have anything to operate on every year. So it just struck me thinking about the staff report, we're going to need some help on policies on use of debt appropriately versus retained cash and versus just normal operating cash that flows through the budget every year. That's my 5 cents worth.
If I can just real quick, I agree with that, and the final budget envelope that we've got and trying to make sure that we stay within a financial stability. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, and we are going to have other things. The other question I have for you is it on the risk framework, you asked for make sure the park bench versus the sewer. Isn't that the second factor there, which is the consequence of the failure?
In that simplistic slide, it just wasn't well defined. So I think in their conversations with staff and the rating tables that come back to us, that could be bifurcated a bit more so we understand the difference in weighting. That I'm just simplistically reacting to if you went to a public input committee,
right?
Well, gee, what's an economic failure? Well, it could cost us money and tax revenue. It could cost us quality of life. But if you can't turn on the tap and get drinking water, if you can't dispose of liquid and solid waste, you've got a public health nightmare and society implodes. So I want the other members of the community that give input to broaden that economic, environment, social thing into safety.
But I'm just saying that's where the other factor is.
Yeah. Great, very good. Councilmember Turner?
Just a quick question. First off, I agree with what my peers have said. Thank you for this work. You're giving us the tools that we've been asking for a while so that we can do long-range planning and protection of city assets and protection of the taxpayer dollar. So I really appreciate that. Just a real quick question. Are we ignoring LARPD facilities that are owned by LARPD? Okay, so we're just city-owned, LARPD maintained.
Yes, this main focus is on the City of Livermore general fund items.
Including our enterprise fund?
No.
You wanna-
So we're
No,
ignoring the enterprise funds?
Yeah, the enterprise fund is also being reviewed, but that is a separate thing that we've come to council before with.
Right.
That Darren Gray with the Public Works Director.
We've
has come
already
before,
gotten, yeah.
And he is reviewing that over there. This particular study that we're embarking on now that you improved in September was for general fund.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for the work. I really appreciate it.
Councilor Spadowski?
Again, thank you for the work. That's exactly what we've been asking for. I was wondering, what's the estimated timeline for the completion of the work? I don't know if we went over when we're gonna get this at the end of the fiscal year, or I assume not that quick. You're walking every sidewalk. That's gonna take a little while.
We are estimating that the data collection efforts are going to be in the range of about 6 months,
Right.
and then we'll add on the analysis after that. We are looking at a total process of about 18 to 24 months.
Okay, and then I have a question for the consultant about the continual level of effort for staff to keep the database up, because I realize,
Right.
Day 2 after assessing something could already change from day 1,
Right.
let alone year 1, year 2, year 3. Everything's a great snapshot in the time that it was taken. So once you develop the system, what's the level of effort for staff to keep the system up to a kind of a useful level in terms of the database?
That's an excellent question, and there's a bit of a culture change question that needs to come with this part of the asset management program. And, as we're building this program, Anthony and I'm almost hip to hip in developing the program in terms of reviewing the assets. There's a lot of knowledge transfer that takes place through that process, but you will end up with a very, very large data, and it will require someone to have an understanding of that data and someone to start managing that data to provide information that is necessary for sound decision making, but also that is necessary to maintain and the assets as being called out by the tool in that. So as we're developing the program, we will see what kind of magnitude and how much resource perhaps it needs to be dedicated to sustaining this program and further improving it so that the confidence level of the projection that we are making every year gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and hopefully, as a consultant, sometimes it's very difficult to say this, but my success is if I could walk out of this and I'm no longer needed. That's the best way to measure success on that. So our intention is to provide the methodology, the process, the data, and the tools, and the training associated with that to the city staff to sustain the program after our departure.
Yeah, because as someone with experience in creating data layers and GIS systems, see, you almost have a perfect nightmare here mix on the council, and I'm looking at it and I'm seeing it's great work. It's going to take a lot to maintain it, and when it comes down to specific, and these very customized database management, you just can't pick somebody out of staff and say, guess what, it's your job to do this and to figure it out without keeping a high quality. And it could, it should pay for itself in terms of the planning and the budget process. The other question that I had, how do you account for assets that exceed their useful life, and to the point where, do you ever see assets jumping from a red to a yellow? Because, you may categorize something as a high risk, but year after year as you're assessing it, you're saying, hey, that culvert should have failed 10 years ago, yet it still looks great.
Right.
So is that also, that's, kind of when I was thinking of the staff workload of going out and constantly assessing assets and then determining and making that decision.
That's right.
Is it red? Is it yellow? Did it go from red to yellow? Did it go from yellow to red?
That's right. I always already feel like you're asking me questions that, Councilman Gary Warner, Councilman Warner, is asking all these questions that we're going to talk about in a year from now almost. Okay. So it's great that you have this foresight of what's going to happen, how we're going to need to address that. So to address it a little by, in terms of the problem of failure, the failure, you're absolutely correct. Doesn't mean that an absolute asset failure, crumbling of a failure. It means we're looking at, as you can see, from a 4 different perspectives. Mortality is, for example, a pipe. When a pipe collapses, the structure of a failure and asset just functions because it's no longer an asset anymore. That's a mortality failure, perhaps. But however, we're also looking at from a level of service failure. For streets is a good example. How many potholes are we going to allow before we're going to invest? So from a failure, from my perspective, is time until we need to do something about it, which means time until investment needs to be made to rectify that current situation. The consequence of failure, as Councilman Warner has said, is all about prioritization. If we had all the resources and if we had all the budget, then we could do all the work that's being projected, then we don't even need the consequence of failure, but that's not the case. So how do we prioritize what needs to be done? Okay, what's going to have the most impact of failure from economic, social, and environmental perspective, and then we prioritize so that we're getting the best bang for the buck out of it. Now, addressing your question then, the assets will want to move up to the red zone as time goes by. However, as management of these assets, we're trying to fight it to keep it from coming into the red zone. So from that perspective, how do we get that process going? As we set this data and provide this data back to the city is now working on different management system that's going to allow the staff to go out and maintain. Today I worked on what asset, how much, what did I do, how many hours did I spend, what needed to be done. As the staff is going out and revisiting this asset, one of the data criteria that's going to come out is a condition score. So initially where the condition score is not there, it may be driven by an age-based system, knowing best practice, industry practice. A motor perhaps lasts 20 years. However, as staff goes out and works on and maintains, does the oil change or whatever to maintain these assets, we're constantly bringing back the latest and greatest information, and that's the condition score. So as the condition score stays or improves or decreases down the road, then the model will incorporate that data as the best data available and then push it up, push it down, and however. So that becomes the confidence level that we're talking about, where you're increasing that. So that process is all
just
built.
making sure it's not, this is the useful life by industry standards, therefore it's going to be read at this date, but, make sure that but it will take many years to go out and check everything, which leads to my final question. You mentioned explaining the infrastructure story to the public, and I know people love curling up in front of a fire at night, reading a good infrastructure story. And I don't know if the infrastructure committee that you explained is related to this, but if you have any experience actually conveying that infrastructure story to the public, because that to me is one of the larger hurdles. Explaining to people that you have a culvert that nobody ever sees is suddenly pancaking and it's going to take $2 million to repair. That you've driven over that culvert every day and it's just out of sight, out of mind, and suddenly it's a $2 million hit to the general fund. So I don't know if you're anticipating that the infrastructure committee would play that role, getting the word out, or if they're literally going to be looking at pictures of benches and saying yay, nay, that's acceptable, or just a little bit more detail on the two.
Yes, there's a key role that the infrastructure committee is going to play, and when we provided this service for another city and we had an infrastructure committee there that was composed of citizens, stakeholders, it was also business owners, and people that have interest in the infrastructure and the betterment of the city was involved throughout the process. But we realized that one of the first things that we had to do them was educate them on these infrastructure. And like you said, they don't know. People understand roads, people understand, parks and picnics because it's very visible. But how many people understand anything about storm drain, and then well, that's your specialty. But also, one of the benefit is that we were able to take them around to different groups of infrastructure and then, have the engineers and have the maintenance and have the operations staff explain about what this asset is. For example, we went to a segment of our road where a patchwork was going on. So the staff, the members of the group then observed the whole patching experience. And one of the questions that came up is like, why are we wasting time just patching this one pothole when the whole road needs to be replaced? Then the engineer came and it's like, do you realize how much it costs to replace or refurbish the whole work? So the whole understanding of the process needed to be taking place in terms of education. Once they understood the asset, once they understood what it really takes to provide the service level of that asset and the costs associated with it, they had much better open mind as to what is more acceptable levels of risk or levels of service versus, I want the absolutely best for my infrastructure.
I would hope in that education process, and also when we present this to the public, we provide a bit of history as well, as we have our city historian here tonight. I'm sure he can dig up a few pictures of First Street flooding annually. It was just an annual occurrence. It's like, yep, there we go, it's First Street. This is many, many years ago, but we spend and we get, federal help installing these huge flood control projects, and now it's, okay, they're full of sediment, they're full of reeds, and we need to take that stuff out, or else we're going to be back to flooding every year.
Well, what shocked me tonight was, from the gentleman's presentation, there was 1916 was it? There was a complaint about your sidewalk system. So even back then, they had infrastructure issues, and which tells me that you have sidewalks over 100 years old that you're going to have to deal with.
Any other questions? You guys got all mine.
I got one last
Further
one.
follow-up?
Based on what Councilmember Turner said, have we approached the other jurisdictions within the city and asked them if they want to participate?
If you're referring to LARPD and some of those the districts, the school districts, for example, no, we haven't.
Just might suggest you do. Because if that car's out there with the cameras, they might want to know it.
And this is a tremendous amount of data. You're talking about every valve in the street that nobody sees. You're talking about the age and exercising of the valves and the like. So we had a similar data management system where I used to work, and we didn't have someone that was dedicated staff to maintain that. And within about 6 months, it was obsolete, and there was no getting it back. I mean, there were just stacks and stacks of reports, and there was no way to get it back. So just understanding that this is probably going to require a significant amount of staff to maintain this, because every time you patch a pothole, or as Councilmember Spadowski pointed out, 2 days later this is obsolete because you start looking at the pavement condition index, and that ages every single day. And when you're talking about 300 miles of roads in Livermore, 600 miles of sidewalks, and you're looking at every square foot of those roads, that's a tremendous amount of data. So this is going to be something to maintain. And we need to understand now that it's going to take a significant amount of commitment so that this doesn't become really obsolete really fast. But a tremendous effort here, and greatly appreciate all the input. Councilmember, Vice Mayor Gary.
Just one more future-thinking thought, and maybe the industry and the asset management's already developed this. Coincidentally, I was talking with a major metropolitan client today who is trying to figure out how to get beyond 211 and 311 telephone reporting to social media, and more importantly, just a personal digital-based app. And we have a Livermore app, as you think about building the database structure, I'm not saying this is a complete solution, but if we really socialize the Livermore app into a community cares thing, and to say, if you see a leaky water valve can lid, snap a picture. And if the picture's geotagged, that's all we know. Send us the picture. We're going to know what street, what valve is seeping, what storm drain, what bench looks ugly, what traffic or street light didn't turn on last night. Make it really possible. And then maybe above that, a layer of volunteers to sit there and take the incoming stuff and go, oh, I've had 10 inputs today via the web. 8 of them are routine maintenance. They go out to the line departments for light bulb replacements, figuratively. 2 of them are infrastructure, and they go to the infrastructure desk. And every few years, the infrastructure desk looks at a neighborhood and goes, no one's ever reported anything that's too good to be true. Let's be sure to send the human updater there. This other neighborhood, we've got 25 pending citizen alerts on. We kind of know what's decaying. Just food for thought that we turn everybody into a sensor to give us feedback.
Great input.
I got
But the database has to be built. I mean, there's a back end to be built for that.
So one other thought here is that I think it's an excellent point that what we build here will be practical. And I think that what I'm impressed with, this will be at least a thorough assessment so that we understand the nature of our problem and how to think about it.
That's right.
But on a going forward basis, we're going to have to be reasonable as to how we do this. The thought of the fact that all our citizens have mobile devices and we have the ability to pull in the information and do that, I mean, those are all very innovative ideas. But when it comes down to it, I think we're going to be well served by at least putting the assessment of the problem out there and putting a long-term plan together, and it ultimately will come to some mix of using what we have within the general fund, but ultimately we're going to have to get funding somehow other than what's normal. I mean, I'm convinced that's the answer. The question is how much is it and how do we go about it?
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. You just need general direction from the council. I think you've gotten quite a bit of it tonight. Okay, great, excellent. Thank you very much. Great comments. Good job. We do have a speaker card.
We can spend more hours giving them detail, I'm sure, but not now, right?
I do have a speaker card for Connie Copps regarding disclosing the assets to the public.
I think this is a real good idea, and I hope that in the future it gets to be where our employees are able to, foresee the reserve studies that we need to maintain our assets and, keep up with our liabilities. Lorene Turner answered my question, one of the questions that I had with the separation of the general fund and the enterprise fund. I know they do intertwine, everything does intertwine, so I hope that staff would consider Bob Warner's suggestion of getting other, parts of the city involved, whether it be LARPD, or maybe it should include your enterprise fund, because if not, I hope that in the future you would take your data that you get from this study and you do some kind of a parallel with your enterprise fund and communicate well to the public on where the profits of your enterprise funds go, and hopefully that we'll get on track with our needs in the city. I did call maybe a couple months ago on a sidewalk repair because I was tripping on it, never got hurt, and I did call. So my concern too is I think that's been taken care of, but I'm not sure. So in the interim, should you have a repair like a sidewalk that, you might think presents a safety hazard, who would you call, to report that? Who would you get in touch with? Who's the appropriate person for that?
Go ahead and finish up your comments, and then we can address your questions.
I think I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. One of the places I know that we can find where people can report that is the Livermore app that Vice Mayor Gary spoke of, that anybody can download that from the Apple Store, the Livermore app. I use it a lot. everything from graffiti to overgrown shrubs and bushes, cracked sidewalks, potholes. So that's the easiest way to do it is through the Livermore app. But if somebody were to see a pothole or a cracked sidewalk, who would be the best?
Going on the Livermore website is always an opportunity. It's easy to do. You can do it any time of the day, and then we automatically route those to whoever is responsible for maintaining those items, whether it's a pothole or a cracked sidewalk or any tree limb that's down. It's
Okay, and for those that are not that don't have computers, I know that there's some folks that I work with on LCAC that don't. What's the phone number?
They can call the maintenance number, 960-8032.
8032.
And 8020. They can call that.
8020. So
Yep.
960-8020.
Yep. And really, if they call any of the city departments, the engineering or that, we can get that information.
Terrific.
And we log that in, and then we go and assess what the current risk is.
Okay, excellent, great, thank you very much. I think you said you have sufficient direction from the council. Okay, very good.
Mayor, I'd like to make a comment. I didn't fill out my card.
Okay, hand off your card, and then the podium's yours. Hand it to the city clerk if you would, please.
David McGuigan, 351 Ontario Drive. This sounds like a very impressive project and something that a lot of value can be garnered from just getting that snapshot in time set has tremendous value. I mean, that's just obvious. You can then really plan going from that snapshot. My concerns is, having been a software person for a number of years in the databases and whatnot, this will be a very, very severe data management problem if things aren't set up early on how you want to address it. I don't know what a stop sign costs, $500 or something like that. They're not going to fail very often. Putting that kind of detail into your database might add more confusion to the process than you get real guidance from what's going forward. The other aspect I'd like to make sure that the City Council considers is if there's other cities that have done this, let's talk to them now about what they've gotten from it, what their long-term benefits they think they're getting from it, and their long-term costs going forward are, so that we can potentially learn from their experiences going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Wiggins, thank you. Thank you. Okay, sufficient direction on that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Moving on to 6.03, this is the Municipal Code Amendment. It's a temporary ban on commercial cultivation of medical marijuana. Mr. Lee, our senior planner.
Thank you, Mayor Marchand and members of the council. On October 9th of last year, Governor Brown approved the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, which went into effect at the start of the new year and establishes a comprehensive state licensing and regulatory framework for the medical marijuana industry. The new law states that if a city or county has not adopted land use regulations by March 1st of 2016 to either regulate or ban cultivation of marijuana for medicinal purposes, the state will be the sole authority that issues cultivation licenses in that jurisdiction, meaning no local license will be required. The city currently does not have any regulations on the cultivation of marijuana. The proposed ordinance would establish city regulations on the commercial cultivation of marijuana through a temporary 18-month ban. By adopting the temporary cultivation ban, the city preserves local control of the licensing of commercial cultivation. This would also allow time for staff to complete a comprehensive analysis of the new state legislation and for an appropriate amount of public discussion of the development of a permanent regulation to either allow or prohibit the commercial cultivation of medicinal marijuana. So there's a dual purpose to this ordinance. One is to for the city to retain the ability to issue a local license if that's a direction the city wants to take. And secondly, to provide some time to give it some further study and also to allow public discussion of the subject. On December 15th, the Planning Commission considered the proposed ordinance. One person spoke during the public hearing in support of the temporary ban. So the Planning Commission and staff recommend tonight that the council adopt the ordinance establishing an 18-month ban on the commercial cultivation of medical marijuana. Staff is available for any questions.
Questions for staff? So this is not really about whether anybody really wants cultivation or not. This is about maintaining local control. Because if we do not act, then the sole permitting authority is the state, and we can't get that back.
That's correct.
Okay, so this is really about local control.
Right.
Okay, and I believe the League of California Cities has suggested that this is an avenue that the city should take in order to preserve their rights.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. There is a pending bill before the state legislature trying to clean this up right now. However, it's unlikely to pass in time to meet the March 1st deadline. So
Let's see, I think our successor agency, it took them 2 years to get through that one, and the fact that they're saying that they can fix this in 2 months.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Question.
Yes.
Question of the city attorney, just to think about. You don't have to respond to right now. Let us take the public input, whatever it may be. But given the uncertainty of when the state's going to do what on this loophole issue, and how fast or not we may want to proceed for commercial cultivation issues, which have not come before us, have not been researched and pro con yet, could we, if I were to make a motion in a few minutes, could the language of the ordinance be slightly amended instead of just flat saying for a period of 18 months? This is your legal wordsmithing. For a period up to 18 months, or perhaps grammatically, legally, you might prefer for 18 months unless rescinded by the city council sooner. In other words, if the state law all shakes out as part of our medical marijuana local control issues, we want to do it in 6 months, just to pick a number off the top of my head. I don't want this to say, oh, wait a minute, on X date, you said period for a period of 18 months. All we're trying to do is buy breathing room to preserve our place in line so the state doesn't step on our toes. Does that make sense?
It does, Vice Mayor Gary. One thing we were looking at is staff has rolled up its sleeves and is well into the legislation right now and is prepared to come back shortly to provide some guidance or seek some guidance from the council as far as how you'd like to proceed with this issue with regard to dispensaries, with regard to deliveries, with regard to cultivation. We expect to have that hopefully within the next few months. Depending on what that direction is, we may need more time at that point to develop the local regulations, whether to prohibit or to authorize in what shape or form. So we thought 18 months was a pretty reasonable time. You, as the council, always have that opportunity to extend or rescind that earlier if you'd so like.
Councilor Spadowski?
Sure. And then what's been mentioned, at least referred to as a loophole, and the state is trying to correct a mistake. Could you go into a little bit more detail? As I understand it, this was either an unintended consequence of what was passed in October, or it was a date that the state put in, and nobody, I mean, cities are scrambling to deal with this. This is not a unique situation to Livermore. These ordinances are being passed all over California, as I understand it. So.
That is correct. What we've been led to believe is that this particular section, it's 11362.777, subsection C, subsection 4, is where you'll find this March 1st, 2016 deadline. The author, Assemblymember Wood, indicated that that was not the intent to have this language in there, but regardless of intent is what we currently have in the books and we need to respond to.
Okay. Yeah, because as what was mentioned, it is a question of local control, and we wouldn't be here tonight if we didn't have this date appear in the legislation that we've all been asking for so we can settle this issue. So this is not something that we're just picking out of the air and saying we're going to put an 18-month ban on something. It's about local control and responding to this loophole mistake, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. So I've got a question based on Vice Mayor Gary's question. And in principle, I agree it would be good to put in some language like up to, but in general, the date doesn't really matter, does it? Because we can change our mind anytime we feel like it.
That is correct. Picking an 18-month, working with staff, they thought that was a reasonable time period within which to evaluate the current legislation and come back and seek council
Right,
guidance.
right.
and then
But what I'm saying is, it doesn't really matter, because next 2 weeks, we could change our mind if we wanted to.
That's
right?
correct.
So this is just simply putting whatever date, whether you say it's 18 months or up to 18 months or whatever, it doesn't matter, other than to signal that it's our intent that we're going to do this through a due diligence, due process point of view, right?
Correct.
And that was exactly the reason, is the language as written didn't speak to our intent to proceed through.
Right, so I think it's, yeah, I'm just trying to clarify, and I just want to support the mayor's point that this is simply about local control. And we just have to take some action in order, within a deadline, but really, it doesn't bind us. It doesn't stop us from taking any other action at the appropriate time once due process, due diligence has been carried out.
Correct.
The date doesn't matter.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, I've got two speaker cards. I have Stacy Swanson and Oscar Murillo. Stacy Swanson? Oh.
Did Oscar want to go first? I can go first if you want.
Okay, whoop. I got two cards. It was 50-50 chance. So Oscar Murillo and Stacy Swanson.
All right, so first off, welcome to 2016, everybody.
Thank you.
And with this plan of trying to fix this mistake, I think it would be, in a way, good, because for one, obviously, since I'm from a college campus where I'm seeing a lot of college students just huffing and puffing what I like to call the green stuff, and I see it, basically they're doing it for recreational, not for health, and I think this would probably put even some control, not just there for where I go to college, but even here in Livermore, because for one, we have to make sure that the problem of having medicinal marijuana being used more of a recreational thing than for a health reasoning. And as for the ban of 18 months, I think that is probably the appropriate time. And not only that, but probably could get the public approval within that time. But my question is, how much would this plan cost to try and get this fixed?
Well, finish up your comments and then we'll respond.
And the last thing is, aside from trying to get this little mistake fixed, I would also approve of maybe trying to even get licenses to those that need it, because this is what I hear on the news, is some people get licenses not just for medical purposes, but they get it for just to try and, I wouldn't say play the system, but just try and make the system look foolish. So what I might recommend is to make sure if these people are getting licenses for the right reasons, or are they just trying to find a loophole just to smoke it for the heck of it?
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Murillo. Thank you. Just a quick point on that. He was talking about making sure that people that apply for licenses are the right ones to get it for the right reasons. This is one of the reasons to keep the licensing authority under local control rather than grant that to the state. Wouldn't that be the case?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. The new trio of legislation adopted by the state has dual licensing, licenses required by the state and licenses required by the city. We want to preserve the city licensing.
Right. So we have local control. His question about the cost of this ban, we're just going to be doing our due diligence in our own analysis. But as far as cost, there's no cost associated with the 18-month ban as I see it.
For your action here this evening, the cost is just staff time to prepare the ordinance and get into place, and then obviously enforcement by the police department if necessary. But then we'll look for direction from the council ultimately with which direction you want to proceed in.
Okay, great, thank you. Now I have Stacy Swanson.
I've done this so many times, and it doesn't get any easier any time. Thank you very much. Stacy Swanson, Galaxy Court. I support the commercial cannabis grower ban for 18 months and as a policy actually going forward. The industry is too water and energy intensive for a limited water supply and puts the city in opposition to federal law. I also support a dispensary ban within the state until the state and federal law is cleaned up. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Those are the two cards that I have, so it looks like we're done.
Can I say a quick word?
Sure, grab a card real quick, fill it out, and then we'd be happy to hear what you have to say. You can hand that to the city clerk. Certainly.
I don't know what goes into making laws. This is my first city council meeting. All I know is that kids, older people, younger people, everyone, they're gonna smoke recreationally if they want to. I go to dispensaries because I'm a medical patient. I go in and I say, I'm having problems with anxiety today. I'm having problems with depression today. What can you do for me? My best friend stopped chemo for her ovarian cancer, and after 6 months of smoking cannabis, she was cancer-free and never had cancer again. So I think that people in Livermore do need a dispensary because right now it's just deliveries. And like I said, I don't necessarily know everything that's going into this law or what it's about, but I'm passionate about this subject because it's helped me. I work in the industry and it's helped other people. I worked for the dispensary that was here, not for them directly, but I agree with the city shutting them down because they were not working correctly. But I don't think that there should be a ban on medical marijuana or how it's cultivated or grown or sold in the city because that there are some kids who are misusing it. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And this really is not about dispensaries. It's all about maintaining local control. And that's why the staff has crafted the ordinance so that we can control what happens here in our city, and we don't give that control over to the state. So that's why we're here, and we're going to keep working on this. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, so those are the last comments that we have. Do we have any discussion at this point? Councilmember Turner?
When I saw this come up, I was very torn. As my peers know, I am a proponent of medical cannabis. I have seen its use with patients in my own clinical practice, and I'm very passionate about hopefully someday having legalized dispensaries here in town. But I want to get it right. I want to ensure that the product is tested properly, grown properly, without pesticides, so that it is a safe product for the citizens of Livermore. I want to tax it and use that money to fund things like infrastructure stories. It's very fun stuff like that. But there's a right way to do it, and the right way to do it is not rushing through. And our staff does not have enough time with what's going on in the legislature to do it right. And so we need to give them enough time to give us options. And then the council, and then we'll have the discussion down the road, and I'm assuming in the next 12 months or so, do we or do we not want dispensaries in town? Do we or do we not want cultivation in town? And then that discussion will come for the council. But until that day, until they have time to properly vet this discussion, I absolutely think we should vote for this to protect the ability to make the decisions that work for our community, as far as, protection of local control. So that's all I have to say about that.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments?
So I would agree with Councilmember Turner's comments wholeheartedly, and I'm prepared to make the motion as is, and if we want to mess with the date, that's fine, but I might put no earlier than, no later than, or whatever, because it could be up to. So it's just up to, but I don't want to signal that if we need 19 that we're kind of troubled. So
It just comes back.
Right. So I'm okay with up to, as suggested by Vice Mayor Gary. So I'll move as original, and Vice Mayor Gary can amend it, or however you want to formally do it.
Up to is fine. I'll second the up to.
No, the up to would be difficult to enforce. I would like to have a hard date, one or the other. I'd propose 18 months. If we get close to that, we will have plenty of check-ins.
Okay.
I recommend we have the firm
I
date.
just, again, even if people in the audience tonight can easily get confused between commercial, and dispensing, and it's just complicated, and I just thought it didn't communicate the council's intent to not just flat out ban it for 18 months and turn our back on it, which if somebody pulls up the ordinance on the web 2 days from now, all they read is the words, and the words say, ban it for 18 months. I'm sorry, that's just where I was coming from, but it's not a hill I need to die on wordsmithing.
Well, how about this? We had the suggestion on the minutes. Why don't we vote it as is, and then make sure the minutes make it clear that there was a robust discussion about the fact that the deadline is not a hard deadline.
If I may build upon that, what I propose is to work a sentence to that effect into the recitals for the ordinance. So it actually maintains within the ordinance itself.
Okay.
It won't be part of the published in the municipal code, but it'll be in the ordinance as adopted.
I'll move that. So there we go.
Second.
Okay, so moved and second. This is slightly procedurally a little bit weird, but I understand this is a very passionate subject that people have a great deal of concern about. So I will, with my colleagues, if they agree to this, we'll take one last card, and this will be Marilyn J. So if you'll please make your comments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm actually not from Livermore. I'm actually from Shasta County, and I'm sure most of you have already heard that we've dealt with Measure A. We have a full all-out ban, and as a result, we've lost a lot of patients. And when I say patients, I mean kids. I mean like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds who should have had a shot at life. There are 4%, and we're not giving them a shot. By giving an 18-month ban with the wording that was listed in the ordinance, I went over it pretty thoroughly. It's a blanket ban. It's dangerous. It opens you up to a lot of lawsuits. If you look into Butte and Yuba County, you'll see that they are currently fighting similar laws, similar ordinances, and they're doing it very successfully. So I would really look at how much you're willing to invest into this. I know you're very, very interested in making sure you're making the right laws, but I'm asking you at the same time, consider the time span. Obviously, that's something that has been mentioned several times, but the wording is dangerous. The wording in the ordinance allows for so much more to be grown on, so much that isn't legal to continue going on. It blocks out a lot of things, a lot of rights that were afforded to us by Prop 215, which is the plebiscite law. It can only be changed by the people. It cannot be changed by politicians. And I'm sure you guys actually do know this, and I know council does know this. So for those who don't, now you do. But it's important for the people to stand up and say, hey, we need access to our medicine. This puts patients at a risk that I don't think many of you realize. It makes it to where they're not able to go and access their medicine. Patients who are wheelchair bound cannot get out of bed, go to a dispensary if there is no dispensary in town, if there's no collectives, if there's no delivery services. How are they going to get their meds? They're going to have to go out of county, out of city, and it's unrealistic for a lot of these patients. You got to think of what you would be able to do. What would you do if you were going through chemo? Would you be able to go 2-3 hours away to go and get your medicine and then come back and then go through the whole process again a couple days later? Just take a different look at it and see from a patient's perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. J. I believe we had someone earlier speak to the fact that there are distributors, there are delivery services for medical cannabis as well. So I think that this is not, though, about deliveries or dispensaries. It's about maintaining local control. Yeah, commercial cultivation. Yeah, it still allows the personal cultivation. This is about commercial cultivation. So people can still, if they have the recommendation, they can continue their personal cultivation. This is about commercial cultivation.
That was the clarification of it.
Right, okay, yeah. So, but it's commercial, it's not personal.
Can I just say one other thing, is that I think we've also got the point that we're looking at this as carefully as we can, and we're not trying to preclude anything, but this particular one is local control. But these other issues are real concerns, and we're not ignoring them.
And that's why we want to maintain local control.
Right.
We have the ability, and we don't see that to the state. Okay, so I've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passed unanimously. Thank you all for your comments tonight. Moving on to 6.04, discussion and direction regarding state or local legislation.
Donna Ponto will be giving a presentation.
Okay, we just worked on one of those. Ms. Ponto.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Donna Ponto, Senior Management Analyst from the City Manager's Office. And the new state legislative year began on January 4th. So today I want to highlight 4 particular items of interest for you. The first is the upcoming state and federal legislative platform. Secondly is the governor's budget. Thirdly is AB 1591, which is a new transportation bill, which, since we've been talking about asset management today, we may actually be getting some dollars this legislative year for transportation and roads. And finally, affordable housing. Now, the city has traditionally had a state legislative platform that you approve every year, and this allows staff to respond on your behalf about topics from bills and executive branch issues that pertain to our desires for our community in support of or opposition to topics. So this particular document, which will add federal aspects to it based on your direction last year, is under development, and at the February 22nd council meeting, we'll be bringing it to you for your comment, consideration, and approval. Now, with respect to the governor's budget, he delivered it on Thursday, January 7th, and you guys are ahead of the state, because a lot of things he's talked about in that budget were things you've tackled with in years past. He's directed the legislature and departments to be prudent. He's also moved money into the state rainy day fund so that they're hitting approximately 67 to 68% of the target amount, and addressing retiree health benefit costs. And in years past, on behalf of the residents, you have made decisions about the reserve funds, which you, Councilmember Warner mentioned earlier today, as well as our OPEB liabilities. So the governor's staff is working to solve those problems on behalf of the state. If things go according to plan, however, the governor's staff is anticipating a moderate recession in 2017 or 2018, that fiscal year, and have stated in the document that if an earlier slowdown in the global economy or a stock market correction occurs, that they will have to make adjustments to the present preliminary state budget. So, as you know, we do have the May revise that comes out, so we'll know more information about that. And as we continue to monitor things that have been happening globally and in the stock market in the last few weeks, we'll know if that continues or if that was just a a blip. Now, transportation is a sizable element in the governor's budget, and he reiterated in it his September 2015 budget proposal to improve our roads and highways. He is still suggesting a 10-year, $36 billion fund that will focus on repair and maintaining existing transportation infrastructure, and it's split 50-50 between state highways and local roads. And there is a formula out there that determines how much each municipality gets. He's also suggesting a new $60 fee on all vehicles, increases to the the gas tax that will be adjusted annually for inflation, an increase in the diesel tax, and $342 million more in shared revenues for local road maintenance. Apparently, the funding for the DMV, the CHP, and the Air Resources Board is not high enough to keep them all solvent. So he's also suggesting an increase of $10 in vehicle registration fees to keep those, as I said, departments afloat. Now, on January 6th, the day before the budget, Assemblymember Frazier, who's a Democrat from Oakley and also happens to be the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, issued his own transportation funding proposal, which is known as AB 1591. He, too, suggests an increase in the gas excise tax by 22.5 cents per gallon, and it will index on the CPI. He also suggests that the revenues generated from that will be split 50-50 between the state and local jurisdictions. Examples of eligible projects in his legislation are road and maintenance, rehab, safety projects, railroad grade separations, active transportation, which are bicycle and pedestrian trails, etc., and local match requirements in order to obtain state or federal transportation funds. He's going to raise the diesel fuel tax, if it passes, by 30 cents a gallon, and that money will go towards state trade corridors. A vehicle registration fee will go up $38 a year for everyone, and those driving electric vehicles will have an additional $165 surcharge for road maintenance. So again, whether it's the governor's proposal that continues, or AB 1591, or a new bill that will be introduced before May, staff will continue to monitor this because it is obviously something of great interest to us and does directly play into the asset management plan that you were discussing earlier. The governor did not create any new programs or funding in affordable housing. However, the California State Senate did introduce its No Place Like Home program on January 4th, and this would provide funding for chronically homeless persons with mental illness using the Housing First model, which has been successful in a number of communities. So staff is also monitoring that as that goes through the process and gets fleshed out in more detail. We will continue to monitor the draft trailer language for the budget, activities of the budget committees, and of course the May revised budget. And information will be continued to be forwarded to you via these sorts of presentations or the monthly updates that you get via a memo. So those are the 4 things I wanted to highlight. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Any questions? So hope for the best. We'll see what stays there, what survives. So great. Okay, thank you very much. Any other issues? Okay, so we'll move on to the committee reports and matters initiated. Let's start with Councilmember Warner.
Oh, good one to start with because I don't have anything to add. So.
Very good. Okay, Councilmember Turner.
I don't have anything to add.
Wow. Don't worry, I'll fill it all in.
I was about to say, I'll make up for it. I have several things.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Spadowski.
Okay, I have a few items to report. On December 17th, I attended the preview night for the Star Wars film at Livermore Cinemas. I'm reporting that sort of tongue-in-cheek because Livermore Cinemas did an excellent job organizing the crowd. They developed a wristband system. They didn't have people lined up around the block for hours. It was all very orderly and organized, and I was very pleasantly surprised that it was such a well-organized event when you see the other theaters with just kind of mass chaos with people, waving lightsabers and things like that, which I left mine at home. On January 4th, I attended the Lab to Board meeting where we approved our legislative platform for 2016. On January 6th, I attended the East Bay Community Choice Energy meeting. The big update there is that we should have a feasibility study completed in May. So that's the first major step in possibly launching energy providing through Alameda County. Two other items that I wanted to mention. One, just before the meeting this evening, the San Jose Mercury News in their blog reported the Chronicle Wine Competition for this year, which they had over 7,162 wineries, were judged by 65 wine professionals over 4 days, and I quote directly from the blog, if I read it correctly here, quote, "Livermore killed it, scooping up 120 or so medals overall." So we can expect in the next few weeks to find out the details of who won what and the success of the Livermore Valley for the wines there. And then the last item that I wanted to mention, and I think I can speak for everyone up here at the dais, I wanted to thank Livermore PD and the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department for their actions on December 26th of this year. I don't think I need to go into too many details, but they made sure that a 6-year-old little girl actually had a Christmas. If you have been following the news, it was a very tragic situation on Christmas Day, and our officers and firefighters stepped up and made sure that this little girl had a Christmas, and I wanted to thank them for that effort. In particular, when you start to hear some more details about the story, there was a letter to the editor in The Independent this week from a family that actually provided the hotel room for the mother and the child that Christmas week. So I wanted to thank PD and fire for that. So that's
a remarkable community. In fact, when that went out on the GoFundMe page, it raised $20,000 in less than 24 hours. This is an amazing community that we live in. Vice Mayor Gary.
Nothing official to report, but as long as we're doing movie reviews.
we can start. Everybody tune out now if you don't want spoilers, right?
On an agenda night full of economic issues, if you haven't seen The Big Short, I was really impressed, and I think it ought to be required in every high school and college economics class. We lived through it, and I still learned something in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it's not often you say a work of entertainment's also a pivotal recantation of history, and they did if you haven't seen it, they did a really nice job. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back sleep now.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. And December 16th, I attended the Red Tape to Red Carpet. It's the Silicon Valley Leadership Group recognition for our Livermore veterans home ownership program that we have, where they were taking blighted homes and working with Sandia National Laboratory volunteers and Habitat for Humanity, and actually it allowed veterans to buy into these homes and come back to town, and we recognized the folks that were recognized that night. We had Janice Jensen, the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, Larry Carrillo and Stephanie Beasley from Sandia, Eric Aranga and from the city of Livermore, as well as Fran Reisner, Teresa de la Vega, Mark Roberts, Jenny Hariyama, and myself. It was quite a recognition for an amazing program that we had. Did we already talk about Forbes magazine in this thing? We made Forbes magazine. How about that? It was talked about the amazing transformation of our downtown and how it was vision driven, because as Mark Roberts said, if you don't have a vision of where you're going to be, how will you know when you get there? And there was a lot of community input, and developed the vision for the downtown, and then moved toward that vision, and we were recognized as one of the top Great American Main Streets, and recognized now in Forbes for that remarkable transformation. On January 6th, I attended the Livermore Cultural Arts Council meeting, and after a great deal of discussion, both about the downtown and the RFP and the hotel, they adopted a statement that the Livermore Cultural Arts Council supports an iconic development in the downtown, which supports the arts and culture community of Livermore. So we'll be hearing more about that. Today I attended the Alameda County Transportation Commission I-580 update that should go live. This is about the high occupancy vehicle and toll lanes that are going to be going in. Those will be opening mid-February. So pay attention to that. If you don't already have them, get your Flex transponder. It can be switched from 1, 2, or 3 plus, and so that will allow drivers to go down the HOV, HOT lanes. So far, 33,000 Flex transponders have been sold. You can also the easiest way is to get them online. That's how I got mine, but you can also get them at Walgreens, Safeway, or Costco. We also had the Planning, Policy, and Legislative Committee meeting this morning as well, where we had the legislative update, and we approved the countywide transportation plan performance measures. And finally, we just released on December 30th the popular annual financial report issued by the City of Livermore. And if you've ever read these things, they can be somewhat intimidating, although the last budget we do is phenomenal. The last 2 of those have been amazingly readable. And this popular annual financial report allows easier access to the city's financial information in an easy-to-read, accessible format. So I encourage folks that are interested in the city finances, you can go online to the city's webpage and access that through the financial website or financial page on our website. So I encourage folks to go ahead and do that as well. So with that, that's about all I have. So with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.